When an atheist goes bad, it no more reflects poorly on other atheists or on atheism itself than the Westboro Baptists or the Lord's Resistance Army reflect poorly on Christianity, or radical Islamic terrorists reflect poorly on Islam. Now, I know not everybody agrees with me on those last two. There are many voices within the atheist community that feel that the Westboro Baptists or the members of Hutari or the Lord's Resistance Army or some other group of radical, perhaps even violent Christians do reflect poorly on Christianity as a whole or on other Christians, that they are somehow sort of the true believers, the most authentic followers of their scriptures. And of course, there are many more people even than those that believe that very thing about Islam, that somehow the radical, fundamentalist, violent Muslims are the true Muslims, are the most authentic Muslims, and all of Islam, all Muslim people are somehow tarred by their actions and their beliefs. I don't feel that way, and because I don't feel that way about those groups, I certainly don't feel that way about atheism. The shooter in the Chapel Hill shooting that took place last week in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Craig Stephen Hicks, as he is referred to by all three names in the newspaper reports. He was an atheist, and he was not just a sort of detached, laissez-faire atheist by definition. He seems to have been very engaged and active in the atheist community. He was a very outspoken atheist, a very outspoken critic of religion, and the people that he murdered were Muslims. It does not appear at this point that his atheism or their being Muslim had anything to do with the crime. The police are saying that the shooting was over parking disputes. As absurd as that sounds, apparently Craig Hicks and his neighbors in his condo complex had been arguing bitterly for some time over parking. He was apparently very uptight about people parking in his designated parking spots, and that seems to have been the underlying conflict of this crime. Even so, I do feel like this situation is a good opportunity to reflect on some of the concerns that I have about the atheist community, especially on the internet. Even though I don't think that Craig Hicks's atheism motivated the crime, and even if it did, I don't think that that is somehow a black mark on atheism itself. I completely reject all of that. I do think that Hicks's attitude toward not only Muslims, but religion in general, is indicative of a real hostility that I see in the atheist community toward religion. And unfortunately, whether we intend it or not, and frankly, I think some of us, a small number of us, do intend it, but most of us don't intentionally attack religious people. But nonetheless, that hostility that we put out there against religion can be transferred to the people who practice those religions so easily, whether that's what we want or not. And when we put out bitter, angry comments directed at religious beliefs, at the tenets of religion, it's not all that difficult for those comments, regardless of our best intentions, to come across as referring to the religious people, as being demeaning or hostile toward religious people themselves, rather than just a critique or a challenge or an attack on their beliefs and their faith. I think religious people should be treated with respect, and I don't mean more respect than non-religious people. I don't mean undue respect. I just mean that we should treat them as respectfully as we treat people from other groups. I don't think you should disrespect someone simply because of the faith that they profess. I want to make it clear, because a lot of times this gets misinterpreted, and I want to make sure you guys are hearing me and you're getting the message I intend to send. When I say that I think religious people should be treated with respect, I don't mean that you have to be respectful of their religious beliefs. I don't think that you need to handle religion with kid gloves. I think it is not only allowable, permissible, but necessary to challenge religious beliefs, to challenge false beliefs and false claims wherever we find them. I think the world would be a better place if more people believed more demonstrably true things. If we based our attitudes and our beliefs and our actions on things that we could have a reasonable amount of certainty were true. I just think that that would be an improvement over the current situation. I feel like the closer we get to that point, the more our society and the more our world will improve. We can criticize religion. We should criticize religion. We must criticize religion, including the behavior of believers, including the traditions and the cultures of these religious communities, including the scriptures themselves. I have no problem with any of this. But I do think that we as atheists, and especially in this incredibly hypercharged, hyperbolic environment of YouTube and the internet in general, we could stand to pay more attention to how our attacks on religion, our challenges of religion, are received by others, not just by religious folks, but by our fellow atheists. If I make an argument that I do not intend to be Islamophobic, and yet it is broadly interpreted as Islamophobic, I would want to correct that. Not necessarily even to apologize for it or to retract it, but just to say, look, you guys who have interpreted what I said as being prejudicial toward all Muslims, I just want to make it clear that is not what I meant. And if that's how you feel about it, then you and I disagree about that. We are not on the same side when it comes to that. I would want to make that clear. And I think sometimes in the atheist community, we're not as good at that as we should be. Sometimes we say things that we don't intend to be taken a particular way, but they are taken that way nonetheless. Perhaps we could have phrased things a little better. Perhaps our tone indicated some kind of hostility that we didn't think was there, but was read to be there by other people. It doesn't matter how it happens. Sometimes it happens despite our best intentions. And I think we are really bad at correcting ourselves or at clarifying ourselves when those things happen. And I think it's really important to do that, because I think that's how that kind of hostility, that kind of animus toward not just the religion itself, and not just toward religious institutions, not just toward the oppression that religion imposes on people, but on religious people themselves, is allowed to grow and to fester and to become commonplace. We should direct our criticisms and our attacks at religion, at the claims of religion, at the attempts to impose religion on other people, to make other people live according to religious laws and respect religious traditions and customs by force of civil law. That's the sort of thing we should set our efforts against. We should set our efforts against teaching religious doctrines in public school classrooms as science. We should set ourselves to maintaining and strengthening separation of church and state. These are things that we should be advocating for science and promoting positive information about a scientific, skeptical, secular worldview. These are the things we should be doing. And if in doing that, there are people who take our criticisms of religion or our challenges of what we feel is religious encroachment beyond its rightful place in our society, if people take that the wrong way and they take that as a prompt for hate speech or hostility toward people of faith, whether those people of faith are Christian or Jewish or Muslim or Hindu or pagan or whatever, we should strenuously disown that. We should make it clear that that is not where we're going, because that is not where we should go. Well, now that I've pissed off a lot of my fellow atheists who are watching this, I would like to end this video by bringing up another aspect of the crime that began this whole diatribe of mine, the shooting of those 3 people by Craig Hicks. I want to talk about another aspect of Craig Hicks that I think is actually a lot more relevant to the crime. Hicks had a gun, the gun that he used to murder those people. He is one of the millions and millions and millions of Americans who have guns that, in my opinion, they really don't need. I actually looked up crime statistics, and the area where he lives, Chapel Hill, has rates of violent crime and property crime that are below the medians for both the United States as a nation and for North Carolina as a state. It doesn't seem like, I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem like he lived in a terribly violent area. And the neighborhood where he lived, the condo complex where he lived, seemed to be a fairly nice place. And correct me if I'm wrong, those of you who know better, but that's the impression I get. I don't see why he needed a gun. If I had to guess, I would say that Craig Hicks had this handgun of his, which he was proud enough of, by the way, to post a photograph of it on Facebook. If I had to guess, I don't think he had this gun for purposes of legitimate defense. I think he had this gun to intimidate others and to compensate for his own insecurity. And part of the reason why I say that is, as I mentioned at the top of this video, he was apparently incredibly uptight about people parking in his parking spaces. And I read a newspaper report about this crime that had quoted several of his neighbors who claimed that when he would find someone parking in one of his parking spots, he would go over and knock on their door and stand outside their door with the gun on his hip and tell them that they're not allowed to park there. He would put his gun on, presumably, unless he just carried it around everywhere. He would put his gun on, and he would go over and make sure he had his gun visible on his hip when he went over to yell at his neighbors about parking in his spot. That, to me, is not the act of a secure person. That is not the act of a person, to me, that should be having a gun in the first place. I am not impressed by people who walk around wearing their guns on their hips, hoping that we'll all notice that they have a gun. That is one of the least impressive people to me. When I imagine that person, I'm imagining a very unimpressive person. And maybe I'm talking out of my ass. Maybe I'm mischaracterizing Craig Hicks. But you know what? He's a murderer, so fuck him. He took this gun, which he didn't need, and he used it to murder 3 people. I don't know if better gun regulation, if better gun policy would have made any difference in this case, but I think he is indicative of the masturbatory gun culture in this country that has told people for generations that a firearm is just something that they're entitled to have, whether they need it or not, and that if you have a gun, that makes you impressive. That makes you intimidating. That makes you tough. That makes you someone that people have to respect. We have a national gun fetish. And I believe that and Craig Hicks's gun ownership was far more relevant to this crime than his atheism or the influence or the shortcomings or the troubles that people have with atheism in general. I really don't think that had anything to do with this crime. And I wish we were not talking about that so much, and we were talking a little bit more about the way we feel about guns in this country and the way we celebrate them and glorify them. I think that is a much bigger problem and a much bigger threat to our nation and our safety, and far more unbecoming of our country, of our communities, of our culture, than anything to do with atheism. I think religious people should be tweeted? I guess if you follow them, you can tweet them.